Mary, could you really be in this town? Are the words that start the journey of what is perhaps the most influential and massively important survival horror games of all time. It's not an understatement to say that. You don't have to look long on the internet to find 100,000 video essays talking about this game, or 100 articles all talking about how this is a revolutionary game for 1,000 different reasons. And that's all correct, but here's the thing. I don't care about any of that. Silent Hill 2 is an absolute incredible game. Perhaps one of the best games ever made, and I want to talk about it. Except I'm going to do a little more than just talk about the game. I want to talk about a particular little horror movie that may seem unrelated, but has a bigger influence on this franchise than you could possibly imagine. Of course, I'm still going to give this game the same treatment as I would any other game. We're going to hit all the usual suspects. The story, the characters, the music, the gameplay, and all that. But I also really want to talk about the symbolism that's baked into this game. And more than anything else, I want to talk about this game's legacy and if it's truly warranted. Also, I'd like to note that for the sake of convenience, I am mostly going to be talking about the remake. You can complain as much as you want, but I don't care. It's just easier this way. There's definitely some other points I'll make along the way, so we'll see what's lying within the fog as we go about our journey to find if Mary really is alive and in our special place. Before I talk about the game, I want to talk about something immensely important to the entirety of Silent Hill, and it's Jacob's Ladder, 1990, director Adrian Lyne. While I'm not going to explain the entire plot, or really any of the plot, I want to talk about some elements of the film that have a particular significance to this game. Because, seriously, this thing has such a monumental influence on every aspect of Silent Hill. To start with the obvious, James Sunderland's jacket, the M65, is the exact same as Jacob's. It's a small detail, but visually it indicates the kind of traumatic mental journey that both of these characters go on, similar to the experience of those who served in the US military during the Vietnam War. Now, Jacob's Ladder is in part about that war, and Jacob's status as a veteran isn't an insignificant factor in how that movie plays out. But James isn't a veteran, so we can set that line of comparison aside and just focus on the traumatic mental journey. But here's the thing that's really interesting about these two pieces of media is what they use to convey the horrors. Perhaps the most famous sequence of the film is the hospital scene late into its runtime. And I do have to specify because there's a few hospital sequences. The first hospital sequence is normal, albeit a little off-putting. But the second hospital sequence of the film is the real icon. This nightmare, otherworldly hospital is full of images you'd recognize if you've played a Silent Hill game. And that's because this is where the ideas, some of them at least, are from. All of the entities have this distorted, faceless look. Most notably is the way they move. This jittery, shaky, and kind of glitchy movement is incredible. It's so unnatural and creepy in a way that I love. Of course, the game took this philosophy in stride, or this design philosophy in stride, especially with the nurses, who most blatantly do the glitching and shaky movement, especially in the remake. The Brookhaven Hospital sequence, and especially the Otherworld version of it, really reflect the influence this movie had on the game. I mean, the whole Otherworld version of every location kinda reflects the dream sequences that Jacob has, where in one world he's with his actual family with kids and all that, while in the other he's with a different woman, and the way these worlds have their own oddities and distortions is one thing. But again, the hospital sequence in this game is just so on the nose. One other thing I want to touch on is the weird-ass party scene in Jacob's Ladder. This scene does some foreshadowing for the big twist of the film, but more interestingly to note is the weird sexual bug demon horse thing. It's really hard to explain, and I wouldn't show any clips of it because it's got so many flashing lights that it nearly gives me a headache. But just know that this weird sexual monster is shockingly relevant in Silent Hill 2, and you can see it in pretty much all of the bosses of the game, and I'll touch on this later when I talk about the symbolism and meaning of the bosses, but just know that this is an inspirational scene for sure. Now, I know it's not relevant to Silent Hill 2, but I have to talk about the subway sequence that introduces us to the film proper. This is quite literally recreated one-to-one in Silent Hill 3, down to the minute things like the lock on the subway doors being the same in both. And more than that, we literally get a one-to-one recreation of a shot from the movie in Silent Hill 3. The shot of Jacob approaching a door from the tracks, then having to narrowly avoid a suddenly incoming subway car, is done almost the exact same way by Heather, which is a neat touch. I had to mention it because I love Silent Hill 3 and I'll take any chance I can get to talk about it that I can. Anyhow, I think that's all I need to explicitly mention about Jacob's Ladder up front. Maybe one day I'll do a proper essay on it, but for now, I just want to cover the legendary game that is Silent Hill 2, and I can't do it without at least giving you the proper context of Jacob's Ladder. Mary, could you really be in this town? Are the words that start the journey of James Sunderland. His wife Mary died 3 years ago from some disease that made her wither away into nothingness. In spite of this, though, James got a letter addressed to him from her, saying one of the more iconic video game speeches ever, which I will completely bastardize by reciting it all myself. In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday. But you never did. Well, I'm alone there now. In our special place. Waiting for you. And as impossible as James knows this to be, he's gonna go find her. The only problem is he doesn't know where in the hill she could possibly be, since that whole damn town could be their special place. However, you gotta set all of that aside, since we have to get there first. Thus begins James's trek from the Overlook down into Silent Hill. So hike through the woods and down into the foggy abyss below. Along the way, the fog gets thicker, the forest makes eerie sounds, and we eventually reach the graveyard that's just outside of town. Once there, standing alone in the fog in front of a grave, is a very plain-looking woman in a gray sweater. Her name is Angela, and she's one of the very few people we'll encounter in this journey, and boy does she have quite the journey to go on in the background. Anyways, she gives us direction into town, and we go on our merry way. Upon arriving into town, James sees a very odd-looking flesh creature skitter off into the distance, and James, ever the fool, heads off after it. We get the chance to look around the town, and we can see how run down and destroyed this place is. The fog is thick, and there's no signs of life except for that creature. So let's go. Check it out! We follow the trail of blood to this creepy abandoned house where you can hear radio static of all things. We head off into that great unknown, only to find this weird fleshy man-worm thing in a very derelict house. We use a nearby plank of wood to cave its skull in and pick up the radio along the way. Then we make our way into South Vale proper as we continue to try and figure out where the hell Mary could be. Your best bet would be to make it to the pier overlooking Lake Toluca. So James has to figure out the best way there in this decaying town where the roads have turned to sinkholes, which leaves us to the only viable way there, through the Woodside and Blue Creek apartment buildings near the middle of town. But of course, you need a key to get in. This is where I make the conscious choice as I recap not to include any of the answers to puzzles, which does mean skipping over some things and interactions that happen for the sake of brevity, and I'm saying all of this now so that when I jump to the beginning or to being inside Woodside, you don't question why I'm jumping ahead. After fixing a jukebox, getting a key, and running through the now incredibly heavy fog and wind, you enter Woodside Apartments and you're off to find a way to the other side, which means more puzzles. You explore the apartment and wander around until you reach a room on the second floor, one of the very few you can enter, and see a mannequin wearing Mary's clothes and a flashlight on it. So yoink that flashlight and get attacked by probably the third most iconic enemy in the game, a mannequin. These four-legged entities are a pain in the ass to hit and are so annoying, yet they have an important part in this franchise's legacy, so they get a pass. Anyhows, as you progress further and further into the apartments, you reach a couple of key first encounters. One is when you go to pick up a key, this blonde-haired little shit kicks the key out of the way, taunts Reach, then disappears, which marks our first encounter with Laura, whose theme is maybe my favorite piece of music in the entire game. It just feels lame to say, but come on, it's so good. Then you encounter Eddie, an off-putting gluttonous bastard who will only cause trouble later on. Then, in a different area, you encounter him. As he stands there menacingly, you notice the unintentional icon of the franchise, and the often misinterpreted one. It's Red Pyramid Thing. You'll encounter him more directly when you enter a room and have to hide in a closet, as he absolutely murders two mannequins in front of you, or does something completely different in the original release, which will be touched on later. Anyways, the point for now is you make your way through Woodside Apartments and make the jump into Blue Creek and off into the other world. This is where Silent Hill starts to look like the Silent Hill we all know and love. A nightmare world of rust, blood, and decay, and even tougher enemies because God just hates you like that, I guess. And speaking of God hating you, you get the second encounter with Angela, and boy, this game does an incredible job of implying what Angela has endured and survived, which we will talk about later on. But all you need to know about for now is that you get her knife, and this goes into your personal items. Again, we'll talk about that more later on because of course the items in your inventory are relevant to what ending you get, since this game is just insanely detailed like that. Anyway, you eventually make your way down to the exit, and you get to this remake's version of the first Red Pyramid Thing boss fight, where you just have to dodge and weave your way through a long while until the air raid, keep rolling, what? Siren being another survival horror game made by the guy who did the original Silent Hill games, and eventually you shall be released into the world and out into the park, but before you do that, you encounter Laura, who has a letter from Mary, and she taunts you with it before disappearing into West Southvale. At the pier, we encounter Maria, a woman who looks strikingly similar to Mary. She tags along with you for a hot minute, and you tell her of your plight and quest to find Mary. She takes you to a popular spot for lovers, and surprise, surprise, you don't find Mary. But you do hear something going on in the theater, so jump in and encounter Eddie and Laura talking about how Eddie did a really bad thing. You're still on the hunt for Laura and her letter, so you're gonna have to track it down and do the Lord's work, which means interact with Eddie as he continues to gorge on food, then get back on track. You explore the theater and chase the girl out and into the most famous location in Silent Hill, Brookhaven Hospital. In the hospital, you explore the trashed wreckage of the building and encounter the nurses, the second most iconic Silent Hill monster design. But more than that, Maria gets ill, and you leave her in a room on the second floor and keep on going on. We'll touch on this little fact later on, because again, the little things in this game all have an impact, but we'll get there. So set this aside, we're gonna go off and hunt down Laura. She's on the third floor, and she, being an asshat, locks you in a room, and you get the first real boss fight, Fleshlip. I say the first real boss fight because this is the first boss you actually get to kill! This one boss fight is a wild one, and the archetype it represents is really interesting symbolically, but that's for another section. Upon clearing the boss, we get sent into the otherworld version of Brookhaven Hospital in a shot that is a near one-to-one recreation of the Jacob's Ladder hospital transition sequence, which is really cool. And hey look, me rambling about Jacob's Ladder earlier was relevant. Anyhow, not much of plot significance happens in this segment, at least not until you re-encounter Maria again and near the end of the area and solve the final puzzle. The final part of this area is a chase sequence against ye old red pyramid thing that ends in James getting in an elevator and Maria getting stabbed to death. James is once more alone as he exits the hospital and out into West-South Vale, and it's nighttime now. It's full of monsters, despite how desolate the town feels now. More puzzles ensue. You get another encounter with Angela, who is just as broken as ever. And eventually you make your way to the Silent Hill Historical Society, since that's the only place we haven't explored in town yet. We head on down this seemingly endless staircase into Toluca Prison? Weird and wacky, but not as weird as encountering that gluttonous shitwad Eddie in the cafeteria. What a loser. Anyway, we rush through the prison since there isn't any major story point in here, and we escape down into the next section, the Labyrinth. Down beneath the lake, we have to go through a series of nightmarish puzzles, but not before re-encountering Maria? Yeah, we get one of the more iconic moments from Silent Hill 2, the jail cell sequence. And I'm going to be honest with you, the exacts of this scene don't really matter. What does matter is Maria attempting to take the place of Mary in James's mind. Anyway, the Labyrinth is this non-Euclidean shit show series of trials that we can mostly skip talking about because it's just puzzles and gameplay, except for one of the most symbolically rich and emotionally devastating scenes and boss fights in the game. Among the deteriorating shitstorm of the Labyrinth is a recreation of the Woodside Apartments. Or is it Blue Creek? It doesn't matter. But there's one in particular, Angela's apartment. The boss fight is against Abstract Daddy, and this is a really interesting fight mechanically in the remake, as it's equal parts chases and actual fight. It's a really unique one in this game. However, what really makes this scene significant is Angela. After defeating Abstract Daddy, Angela starts kicking the shit out of the body. James goes to try and calm her down, but she physically recoils, chews you out for saying that you probably moved on after Mary died, and that you're a filthy liar like everyone else. She runs off, and you're off to keep going through the labyrinth. At the end of the labyrinth leads you down a hallway of lost souls that you can only get through carrying Red Pyramid Thing's giant sword, and tossing you into a graveyard where every grave has a name of someone relevant to the story, including an empty, open grave with your name on it. And once more you jump into a hole. You've done this like a billion times already, it just hasn't been relevant to mention, and descend further into your mental abyss. You encounter Eddie in a meat locker, and this is Eddie's big moment. He's a terrible dog-murdering piece of shit, and I don't care if he's got some sob story about being bullied his whole life. You kill an innocent animal like that, and you need to be executed. Which is why we're going into the single worst fight in the game. Fuck Eddie's boss fight, and fuck this character. Kill him and head on out to a dock and rowboat where you can cross the lake and head on out to the hotel on the water where you and Mary once stayed. Head on into the hotel, find Laura. She has a letter from Mary that she lets you read. And it's clear that Mary knew she was going to die, but there's one more letter that Laura had, and she's running off to find it while you're off to reach the mythical room 312. So expect more puzzles until you get there. Once in room 312, you find a VHS player and pop in a tape you found earlier, which means you find out the truth of what happened 3 years ago. After a normal home video, we see Mary cough. Then we see it's been taped over with something different, a creepy, staticky nightmare tape that reveals that James Sunderland killed his wife. Yeah, this is one of the most famous twists in any video game ever. I mean, God, I've even referenced it in other videos to talk about twists. See the double exposure clip here. It turns out the last photo Safi ever took was of Max pointing a gun at her, thus implying that we killed her. This is a Silent Hill 2 James Sunderland killed his wife ass twist, and I am here for it. It's so cool, oh my God. And yeah, it's such a good reveal. The game hints at it throughout, but God, it's such a good scene. Then after the tape ends, Laura comes in and you tell her what happened. She chews you out, and the game eventually transitions you into the Otherworld Hotel, where you have to make your way down to this mysterious flaming staircase in the basement. Here, you watch Angela accept her fate, and she ends her own life after an emotionally charged scene via heading up the flaming stairs. Kind of like the end of Jacob's Ladder, where his son takes him up a staircase, but that's not the point. James is not afraid to keep on living, and so he carries on into a great chamber where Maria gets executed by 2 red pyramid things, and then they turn their attention to you. You are now finally able to slay the most iconic monster of the franchise twice over. We'll get into their symbolic meanings later, but after you succeed the fight, which ends in them stabbing themselves to death, which matters later, you're off to this hallway where you hear an old conversation from Mary play, and she's angry, full of pain and fear, which is why if you listen to the whole conversation in the hallway, you hear Mary apologize to you, where she basically goes, I guess I'm afraid, about 18 years before that one cowboy game came out. You keep going and eventually reach a large open area with a bed, and Mary, you finally found her, James. You did it. Except, you're not Mary, and this is where James faces his final fight, her. This amalgamation of Mary and her bed is reminiscent of Fleshlip, and is a similar fight design-wise. And after putting her to rest again, you get a scene with Mary where James and her have one last emotional conversation, and James receives her letter. And in terms of video game speeches, Mary's letter is so good, which is why I am going to read her letter in full and then talk about the endings, starting with the one that I'm going to use to end the story recap section, since the other endings will be talked about in full in the gameplay section of this. As James walks onto the streets of Silent Hill, he sits down with Laura and they read Mary's final letter. Without further ado, Mary's letter in full this time. In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you to come see me, but you never do. And so I wait, wrapped in my cocoon of pain and loneliness. I know I've done a terrible thing to you, something you'll never forgive me for. I wish I could change that, but I can't. I feel so pathetic and ugly laying here, waiting for you. Every day I stare up at the cracks in the ceiling, and all I can think about is how unfair it all is. The doctor came today. He told me I could go home for a short stay. It's not that I'm getting better. It's just that this may be my last chance. I think you know what I mean. Even so, I'm glad to be coming home. I've missed you terribly. But I'm afraid, James. I'm afraid you don't really want me to come home. Whenever you come to see me, I can tell how hard it is on you. I don't know if you hate me or pity me, or maybe I just disgust you. I'm sorry about that. When I first learned that I was going to die, I just didn't want to accept it. I was so angry all the time, and I struck out at everyone I loved most, especially you, James. That's why I understand if you do hate me. But I want you to know this, James. I'll always love you. Even though our life together had to end like this, I still wouldn't trade it for the world. We had some wonderful years together. Well, this letter has gone on too long, so I'll say goodbye. I told the nurse to give this to you after I'm gone. That means that as you read this, I'm already dead. I can't tell you to remember me, but I can't bear for you to forget me. These last few years since I became ill, I'm so sorry for what I did to you, did to us. You've given me so much and I haven't been able to return a single thing. That's why I want you to live for yourself now. Do what's best for you, James. James, you made me happy. And after reading the letter, James hands Laura the letter and the two walk off to leave this town far behind to the best song on the soundtrack, Theme of Laura. Roll credits, get a stat screen, and learn that this was the Leave ending. And in the remake, it's ending 1 of 8. The other 7, well, we'll get to those and give the mechanical explanation for how the endings work, but first I've got some characters to analyze. There's only so many people in this purgatory, really only like 5 or 6 people, depending on how you want to categorize Maria. We'll get to that. So we're going to go down the list and talk about these characters in close enough to the order you meet them. And we're going to start with James, since he's got a lot of interesting points to him, and we're going to work our way down to Maria, since there's a fair bit to be said about her. Anyways, let's start dissecting the broken, the beaten, and the damned, shall we? James Sunderland is a very complex character that people inevitably have very complicated feelings about, and that's a good thing. Obviously, the whole game revolves around him, as this is his journey into hell, and as such, basically every monster except for one of them is an entity that represents his fractured psyche. Now, this is only here to focus on the man himself. James is a broken man who had to deal with caring for a dying spouse, and it's a hard question to grapple with. The game establishes that Mary was going to die very soon, regardless of if James killed her, and that it was an incredibly painful and debilitating illness, which raises the question on if James did the morally right thing by ending her suffering sooner rather than letting the illness do her in. I am not going to answer that question. It's not my place to answer that. But it's the core question that makes James's character interesting. I don't fully know where I stand with James. I mean, I like the character in a literary sense. He's a fascinating character that's core narrative question is difficult to grapple with. And I will say the voice performance in the remake is phenomenal. How he didn't win Best Performance at the 2024 Game Awards is an anomaly, even if my personal choice was exactly who you think it is, because god damn that performance. But back to the character in game. As a playable character, the fact that there's a ton of ways James interacting with items he carries, the interactions he does or doesn't have with NPCs, and other mechanical details all reflect his mental state and what ending he gets. It's amazing, and it really adds so much depth to his character. I will say, having played Silent Hill 2, 2 Remake, 3, and now 4, James is not my favorite protagonist in the series, but I might have the most respect for him in terms of depth. I mean, no other protagonist really has as emotionally tumultuous a story as he does. Mary is an amazing example of how to do a character you only get to know through the environment and technically in one scene. She's so integral to the plot, and yet outside of her letter, the VHS tape, and the hallway rant, you never actually hear or see her directly. The time you see her at the end of the game when she gives you the letter isn't real. That's James's vision of Mary that's giving him the closure he seeks, and not actual Mary, given that this is the Mary we see in the photo James carries around with him the whole game. What really makes her a special character, though, is how the world talks about her. All of the documents that show her isolation, her decay, her fear and anger, all of the emotions she felt around dying and how she took that out on the people around her, as alluded to in the hallway scene, and by Fleshlip being a very intentional design. The fact of the matter is that Mary has so much narrative significance, and yet she's not here and you're not Mary. I'm fascinated by the concept of a character being so narratively important, without even being there. It's just such a unique and special concept to me. I don't even need to make my contractual obligation and mention that game that I hate that failed to do this idea, since this game did it perfectly. Mary is a great character, and the real performance of the letter, not me reading it in either version of this game, is beautiful and truly one of the most impactful scenes in any game ever. And speaking of impactful, Angela. Good God, what a soul-crushing character. I mean, the way this game handles talking about her trauma is brilliantly executed. It's never explicitly stated, and it's all conveyed through her body language, like the way she physically recoils whenever James gets near her. So the fact that her fingernails on her character model are, just eaten through because she just constantly bites her nails is a simple detail that does so much to show the devastating and lasting impact surviving the horrors Angela survived takes on a person. Angela also has the burden of being the representation of giving up, as she represents a person pushed to their breaking point, where every waking and resting moment is endless agony, and the only solution in their head is to end it all. On a less subtle level, this is shown with Angela going up the staircase, basically saying death is the only solution left for her. And on a more subtle level, Angela's knife. We'll touch on that later because it's, you guessed it, tied to the gameplay. Eddie is maybe the weakest link in the game, and to be honest, he's got no real symbolism or depth. Seriously, even the Silent Hill wiki has no symbolism listed, and they have symbolism listed for literally everything. This goes to show that even the greatest pieces of media can have flaws and problems, because Eddie doesn't belong here. Maybe the most interesting thing to note about him is that he's the first non-possessed human enemy in the franchise. That's something, I guess. And then there was Laura. Laura is interesting to me because outside of being a child in this hellscape that causes you problems, she plays a role in only one ending. And since it's the one I've chosen as the ending in the story section, I get to talk about it. Laura only being a part of the Leave ending makes Laura a symbol of hope, a symbol that you can move on from the horrors of life and keep living. In Laura's letter from Mary, it mentions how Mary wanted to adopt her if she ever recovered from being sick, and in James's letter, it mentions how Mary wants him to carry on and live for himself, yet him taking care of Laura shows that he still truly loved Mary, and really complicates the question on if James did the right thing, but again, not my place to commentate. The point being, Laura and the idea of fatherhood represent hope and a way for James to grow while still honoring Mary's memory, which is a very well done and rewarding idea for playing the game in a way to get the good ending. Last, but certainly not least, is Maria. She's a very complicated figure, even if you're like me and still haven't played Born from a Wish yet. Side note, why hasn't that come out as a DLC for the Silent Hill 2 remake yet? Seriously, it's the most obvious thing you could do. So I don't have her full extended backstory. What does matter, at least to me, with Maria is that she's equal parts a character and a monster in the game. Please note, what I'm about to say is entirely my opinion and reading of the character. It might be different from your interpretation, and that's okay. Anyways, disclaimers out of the way, Maria is clearly a figure created by James's delusions to tempt him into repeating the cycle and never escaping Silent Hill. This is why James constantly mistakes her for Mary, and why the ending specifically tied to Maria is what it is, and is as deeply yet subtly horrifying as it is. But outside of that, Maria as a character is definitely meant to be tempting James into forgetting Mary and letting his endless torment continue over and over again, but we'll touch on that more shortly since I want to lighten the mood a little by talking about the music before we get to the depressing world of the various endings in the gameplay section. The music of Silent Hill 2 is this phenomenal blend of the most horrifying and unsettling themes from hell, right alongside some of the biggest vibes you could imagine. I mean, Theme of Laura alone might be one of the greatest video game songs ever, and absolutely propels this soundtrack to the upper echelons of video game OSTs. But as a whole, this game's music is just on a totally different level. Just talking about the remake, you've got tracks like White Noise, Actual Noise, Magdalen's Elusive Lament, Promise of the Forgotten, Umbra Veil, Love Psalm of Eternal Devotion, Promise, and Overdose Delusion. And in the original game, it'd be pointless to list all of them. That's how good that soundtrack is. Now, I am going to mention the composer since he's a large part of what makes Silent Hill sonically. The composer, Akira Yamaoka, I believe, is a legend. I mean, his work on Silent Hill 3 alone is honestly even better than Silent Hill 2, but I have to mention the main reason I wanted to talk about him is because he did work on a lot of other games, but most notably to this channel, he did the music for Shadows of the Damned, and, that's right, Lollipop Chainsaw. Back to Silent Hill though, the music does a lot for this game. It adds to the mystery and the oppressiveness of the environment, and it helps elevate the horror. When the boss fight themes kick in, or those chase themes hit, good lord, it adds so much fear. And the more melancholic character themes make those limited interactions feel so much more depressing. But I am once again drawn back to Theme of Laura, because that one track has so much hope baked into it, and it adds so much. I don't know why the horror game has me talking so much about the concept of hope, but that's what happens when you're about to be diving into the emotional depths of hell. I was going to talk about the gameplay of Silent Hill 2, but then I realized that this is really a section for me to just talk about the endings. There's 8 endings in the remake: Leave, In Water, Maria, Dog, UFO, Rebirth, Bliss, and Stillness. Each with their own requirements and unique ways the way you played the game affect the ending, and of course a unique set of symbolic meanings. Excluding the 2 joke endings, which is where we're going to start. UFO is a secret New Game Plus ending, and it comes from using a special blue gem in 3 specific places, and then one final time in room 312 at the hotel. Now, in the original game, you get abducted by aliens, as God intended, but in the remake, it's very special. You encounter original 2001 James, and he's gonna vaporize you and take your place in this world, all done like a silent film, intertitles and all. It's pretty cool to be honest, but definitely super goofy and dumb, and I do enjoy it for those reasons. And it's also a staple of the franchise, as all of the original games do have a silly little alien ending like this. The other silly little ending is the dog ending, where after all of your pain and agony and uncovering the 2 parts of the bone key, you go to the room across the hall from room 312 in the hotel and uncover the truth behind all of Silent Hill. That's right, the truth behind this nightmare was all behind this door. And it turns out that
he orchestrated it.
The dog! James has come to terms with the fact that all of his pain and agony was inflicted upon him by a Shiba Inu wearing a headset in a control room. This was all his design, and for some reason this scene is all in Polish in the remake, or in the original game, Japanese. And this is because the dev team for the remake is from Poland, and so they put it in as an Easter egg for their home country. Small detail, but pretty neat. And now for the far less fun endings and how they function mechanically, from the easiest to the most complicated and symbolically dense. Bliss is one of the New Game Plus endings for the remake, and all you need to find is a bottle of White Claudia, take it with you all the way to room 312, and then down the whole damn bottle and pop in that VHS tape like you're on Best of the Worst. However, what you get out of this is James simply never learns the truth and becomes complacent. He chose to down an entire bottle of an extremely powerful psychoactive and live in a fantasy where nothing bad happened to Mary and all is well. I mean, you can obviously read this as a metaphor for drug abuse in a very hurt by 9 Inch Nails kind of way, and it makes sense to update the game to add that kind of ending. The game is all about loss, euthanasia, and grief, so why not add an ending that's all about ignoring that grief and living in delusion? From there, we have the Rebirth ending, another New Game Plus only ending that requires you to collect 4 items: Crimson Ceremony, White Chisholm, Obsidian Goblet, and Lost Memories, all items of legend said to be tied to a ritual that allows you to bring the dead back to life. So this means the ending is James collecting the items, defeating her, then starting the ritual with Mary's body to bring her back using the magic of the old gods of Silent Hill. As we end the game with James talking about how he couldn't keep living without Mary, so he's going to resurrect her at the church on the lake that I have to mention, since it's the same church in Silent Hill 3. Anyways, the ritual ending is nothing new, being in the original Silent Hill 2, and once more, it makes sense to be here. It's also why I non-subtly mentioned 2025's Bring Her Back, which is a good little horror movie that has themes of loss and grief and turning to the weird, shady rituals to bring a dead loved one back to life. Except this game has exponentially less piss in it, yet somehow more child abuse. The point being, this game dipping into ritual horror is fascinating, even if I'm not a huge fan of it as a subgenre, and it's such a simple little punch in the gut for a New Game Plus ending. Now we can move on from the item-based endings and move into the real gameplay-based endings. And we're starting with Leave because I don't need to explain the events again, but it serves as a perfect way to introduce how convoluted the endings can get based on the gameplay, especially in the remake. Because holy Jesus Christmas shit, legally distinct bat-themed superhero, this is so overly complicated for no reason, and you definitely don't need to do every single thing listed to get each ending. Now, for the Leave ending, the exact list of actions, according to SilentHillMemories.net, an incredibly important resource to Silent Hill fans, the steps are as follows. Examine Mary's letter or photo at least 3 times. Constantly and excessively heal yourself to maintain good health. Kill less than 150 enemies. From experience, you don't really need to do that one. Pin the blame on the snake at the end of the coin puzzle in Woodside. Don't attack Pyramid Head in the first boss fight. Debatable if actually necessary. In the gallows puzzle in the prison, choose the poem that represents Eddie or Angela. Choose the rotten apple for the hotel mirror puzzle. After the dual pyramid thing fight, go through the rust egg door. Listen to Mary's hallway monologue before the boss fight. Final boss. Do not examine Angela's knife. Do not engage with Maria any more than you need to. Essentially, ignore her as much as you can. Technically, the site lists more than that, but I don't care, you get the idea. The reason I go through and list all of that is that a lot of it has significant meaning symbolically. Constantly looking at Mary's items and ignoring Maria keeps James focused on what he came down here for. Keeping him at full health as much as possible metaphorically shows that James isn't going to give up, and he's got that fight in him. Some of the other details in that list are cool little things that symbolize Mary or her illness, like the rust egg and the snake representing the illness, and the point about never blaming Mary or James in the puzzles like the gallows is intentional as it goes into the other endings. The point is, playing the game in a way that keeps James healthy and safe, while also reminding him that Mary is his motivation in gameplay, is an amazing detail. It adds a lot of depth that the player's actions directly impact the story, and maybe I'm a sucker for that kind of thing, but this game does it so well. I'm saving In Water and Stillness for last, so it means we're on to the Maria ending. To get the bare bones mechanics out of the way, you need to focus on Maria and interact with her as much as possible, kill as many enemies as you can, choose the coin or the woman coin in the coin puzzle, choose the options that represent James and the gallows, interact with various items associated with Maria, don't examine Mary's letter, photo, and Angela's knife, skip Mary's monologue before the final boss fight. Now, the scene before the final boss is different, and the interaction with Mary is different from Leave. The actual scene is incredibly sad and off-putting as Mary blames you for what happened and believes you truly hated her. James tries to make excuses, and Mary is incredibly sad and asks if Maria can give James all the things she couldn't. Then it turns into the boss fight. The actual ending has James walking into Heaven's Night, finding Maria alive and well. She gives him Mary's letter and says it's what he's been looking for. He pockets it and they leave together. And as they approach the car to leave, Maria coughs and James very coldly goes, "You better do something about that cough," as they get in the car and leave. And woof, what an ominous and awful ending. It shows that James truly learned nothing and is going to repeat the cycle again and again. It's so awful, and I mean that in a good way. It shows that burying the past and ignoring it doesn't make it go away, and that he's doomed to repeat the same thing if he refuses to learn from that past, as shown by the cough in that final line. It's a very devastating ending in that context, but the most devastating endings are the final two. In Water is one of the original endings, and as such, the way you get it is by playing incredibly reckless, i.e. keeping low health and rarely healing, constantly examining Angela's knife, killing as much as possible at every opportunity, and maintaining a strong bond with Mary's memory, the same way you would in the Leave playthrough, except you blame the man in the coin puzzle and Eddie or Angela in the gallows, and of course, remember to ignore Maria. Before the fight, you get the scene of Maria dressed as Mary, except James realizes that she's not Mary and comes to terms with the fact that Mary is gone, and is in a very empty and worn down way. He puts an end to Maria's nonsense, and we get the fight as intended. After the fight, we cut to James in his car at the Overlook, and he talks about how much he misses Mary and how he can't go on without her, how he can't keep living, and he's about to do exactly what you think he's about to do. He tearfully looks into the back seat at something we don't get to see. It's implied to be Mary's corpse. He then starts the car, and we cut to black as he drives that sumbitch into the lake below, and we get Mary's letter playing over a shot of the letter floating down into the depths. It's the same letter as the Leave ending, and the line about how she wants him to live hits so much harder when he's dead, after having never read the letter himself. It's an incredibly bleak ending, reflected in how James got through Silent Hill in a very suicidal way, and it's perfect. It's so devastating in a way that feels so real that it hurts. And finally, stillness. This ending can only be achieved after you've gotten In Water, as it puts in a few items for you to collect that supersede any other ending requirements. You get the Key of Sorrow very early in the game, and you need it along with a code that's scattered throughout the game to open a safe near the end in the Otherworld Hotel to get the Toluca postcard. With that item in tow, head into the final boss fight, do the same song and dance about how this isn't Mary, do the boss fight as usual, and cut to James in the car, same as the In Water ending. James gives the same speech as before, except Mary responds and starts to ask him what's wrong. She gently rubs his face, he cries and apologizes for everything, and Mary consoles him by telling him that it's okay. He asks her if she'll wait for him. She ominously says that she's always been waiting for him. He looks at Mary's letter in the passenger seat a few times before starting the car, the game cutting to black, and him driving down into the lake below, once more with a sense of finality, as that's where it all ends. No letter from Mary, no post-credits thing, just James drowning at the bottom of Lake Toluca. And it's a really good ending. It shows how Silent Hill as a place just breaks you beyond all comprehension, and the way that final hallucination of Mary comforts him, the postcard actually being Mary's letter, all of that is incredibly and truly devastating. It's a bleak note to end this section out on, and don't worry, the bleakness will continue since I now have to talk about the symbolism in the game, particularly the boss and monster designs, among other things. Wahoo! God, this game's symbolism and depth is among the best in any game ever, and now is where I get to talk about the boss design, monster design, and other such things that really make this game so very special. To start us off strong, we're going to talk about the man himself, Red Pyramid Thing. which means talking about that one scene in OG Silent Hill 2, among other things that make him such an interesting monster. Old Red Pyramid Thing is introduced when he stands ominously at the end of a hallway in the apartments, which is a cool way to introduce this thing, except for the first time you actually encounter him is a little bit later, and is something where the paths diverge in the original and remake. The remake edits this scene, but in the original, RPT is introduced engaging in some violent and non-consensual acts of a sexual nature with two mannequins before he murders them. The remake cuts this down to just murder, but there is a point to the brutality in a literary sense. The sheer brutality of the actions that RPT commits show an extreme and exaggerated version of the violence and evil that James feels he is. Obviously, you can get this point across without the sex crimes, which they did in the remake and was a change for the better, but that's not the core of the point, or even close to the symbolism of the creature. RPT is known as the Executioner for a reason, as he represents James's psychological desire to be punished for what he did, even if he doesn't initially know what for. And further highlighted by that fact is that Pyramid Boy only gets his iconic great knife once James has Angela's knife, which is a really cool little detail that I love. He stalks and torments James until James remembers what he did and comes to terms with it, which is why RPT offs himself after James comes to terms with what he's done after the boss fight. It's a great little piece of symbolism representing that part of James's journey, and it's such an iconic design. The various monsters of Silent Hill 2 all represent something, like the lying figures representing Mary's body, with their top half being a body bag, and their movement being nothing short of painful, and their constant spewing of acid and bile, all while representing the way James felt trapped, hence the skin-like body bag upper half. The nurses are, well, the nurses that attended Mary, while also having a bubble over their head that seemingly suffocates them, which is a really cool symbolic move that alludes to Mary getting suffocated, and all that good stuff. The other monsters all have things, that kind of symbolism, some that I'm too stupid to get based off the game itself, which means we're ignoring the Mandarin and the mannequins and moving right into the boss fights I haven't talked about, and of course, Maria! Fleshlip is an interesting boss in context, as it represents the verbal abuse Mary inflicted onto James, as we get from the iconic hallway speech of Mary's, and as is hinted at in Mary's letter. It's also one of the only enemies in the game to have a proper mouth, which is a small detail that is pretty neat. But the most interesting boss is the one that isn't related to James's journey at all. It's Abstract Daddy, or Angela's boss fight. As is alluded to throughout the game, Angela is a victim of CSA and general child abuse, which is why she reacts to James getting near her like she does. It's why the design of Abstract Daddy is very sexual and inherently trapped on what looks like a child-sized bed frame, at least in James's mind. The thing about Silent Hill is that everyone sees the monsters differently, which means we as the player only see what James does. For Angela, I'd wager she just sees her dad, and we only see an abstract representation of him. It's heartbreaking, but it's so well done, and the fact that it's in such an abstract design and fight shows how you'll never really know what surviving something that traumatic is like unless you've sadly lived through it yourself. It's an amazingly powerful piece of symbolism, and one of the best this game has to offer. Maria is fascinating to me as she symbolically represents James's memory of Mary, and a distorted memory at that. And she exists as a means of luring James along through the nightmare, and represents how the memory of Mary will never leave him. Maria dies multiple times throughout the game, and yet she never stays dead, which serves to prove what I just said. She's the Mary that can't die, but she's the Mary that is doomed to the same cycle of being in Silent Hill forever. The real Mary is dead and gone, she got to move on, but Maria? No, Maria doesn't get such luxury, as she's the figment that keeps James coming back no matter if he survives. He'll never move on if he refuses to learn. Born from a Wish does complicate the matter, and I would speak on it if I were familiar with it, because as much as I understand, it proves that Maria is also her own character, and it's a story about fate versus free will, and it makes it all the more interesting, and it really adds layers to her character, and I really wish I had the time to play Born from a Wish, I tell ya, but I just don't have that kind of time. I'm sorry. The legacy of Silent Hill 2 cannot be understated, and I get it. This is an earned legacy. I don't tend to talk about games with a legacy. In fact, I prefer talking about the things no one else talks about, because a game with a monumental legacy has expectations that tied to it that it often cannot live up to. Silent Hill 2 has a daunting presence to live up to, and the reverence people treat this game with online, you'd expect it to be the second coming of horror Christ. And to be honest, it really is. The impact this game had going forward is insane, and it really did some insane things for the genre going forward, where it truly revolutionized storytelling and horror in a way previously unseen. Yes, I am aware the original Silent Hill did some similar things, but that's not the point. In gaming, look at horror games now, and it's a no-brainer why this game is so important. Cry of Fear, Mouthwashing, Doki Doki Literature Panic, Heartworm, Slay the Princess, and more. Games truly benefited from Silent Hill 2's storytelling and gameplay, and on that level, it has earned part of the legacy it has based on its sheer impact on the genre. The other part of this legacy is how people claim it is among the scariest games ever made. And I will admit, this game has an incredible atmosphere and monster design, but I wouldn't consider this game that scary, especially not in relation to Silent Hill 3, which is still the most scared I have ever been playing a game. Yes, this game is horrifying on a psychological level as you descend further and further into the mouth of madness and uncover that James killed Mary. It's expertly done at inflicting pain onto the protagonist, and it's horrifying when you place yourself into the position that James is in, but at no point did I ever feel that scared playing the game. It's unsettling, it's tense, and it can definitely be gross, but I wouldn't call it as scary as everyone says it is. But I get it, scary is a subjective term, and I'm a genre veteran at this point, so don't take my word as gospel. Let's just get it out of the way and say what has to be said. Silent Hill 2 is still, 20 plus years later, a 10 out of 10 masterpiece of a game. It's one of the most amazing stories in gaming, and it really did the most incredible thing a horror game could do in 2001, 2, whatever. Be genuinely emotional. James's descent into madness is depressing and dark, but there's a beauty in this sadness, and the beauty in moving on, in letting go, the way grief can be moved past when you confront it. It really is worthy of all the praise it received. And you know what? I think that's all that has to be said. That's all from me, and I'd like to thank you for watching me talk about this game rather than any number of other videos you could have watched on this game. All of that said, go play Silent Hill 3. And stay tuned to see what else I'm working on, because I've got some really cool stuff coming up that I'm excited to share with you. Thanks again, and good night.